Welcome to the Final Girls podcast. This is Anna, co-founder of the Final Girls Collective and your podcast host. If you're new to the show, welcome. Usually every season we explore the intersections of horror film and feminism, looking at a particular trope in depth. Right now, we are exploring vampire films. But alongside that, occasionally on the podcast, we cover new films or series that we really want to talk about. And today's bonus episode is all about 12-Hour Shift, the new film written and directed by Brea Grant and out on VOD in the UK now. A hilariously dark film that straddles the line between black comedy, thriller, and horror. 12-Hour Shift follows a drug-addicted, overworked nurse by the name of Mandy, played by horror icon Angela Bettis, who finds herself one night beholden to a gang of organ traffickers. I'm joined in this episode by the writer and presenter Louise Blaine to discuss the film in detail. Now, we're starting to do something a little bit differently here on the Final Girls podcast because there's so many brilliant horror films and I want to be able to cover as many of them as possible. From now on, we'll post the spoiler-free bonus episodes and any filmmaker interviews that we do on our main feed. But if you want to hear the spoilerific full discussion, you can listen to that over on our Patreon right now. We'll publish them at the same time, but we will be keeping the spoilerific discussions on our Patreon. Alongside my conversation with Louise, I was lucky enough to be able to chat to writer-director Brea Grant, and I'll also link to that episode in the show notes. That interview is spoiler-free, so if you still need convincing after listening to this episode, feel free to check it out. Brea is hilarious. And with that said, enjoy our deep dive into the brutally funny 12-Hour Shift. Hello, Louise. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you doing?
I am well, thank you, Anna. How are you? Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure. Always exciting. Really looking forward to chatting to you about this film. I think before we dig into 12-Hour Shift, I know you've watched it before. You saw it at the, I believe, Fright Fest.
Fright Fest, yes. It was the digital Fright Fest, I think.
The
first digital Fright Fest.
The one in August last year, wasn't it?
Yes, the August one, not the Halloween one. I can't believe we're now at the point where we're 2 digital Fright Fests to go and there's going to be another one. It's just very strange. But yes.
We've gone very quickly from a world where an online or a digital virtual festival seemed like slightly foreign the concept to now just being overwhelmed by the amount of choice.
Yes, that's what I mean. I find it weird because my last normal thing before times was Glasgow Fright Fest 2020. That was my last. Yeah, so that was my being in a cinema, everyone being there. And we were kind of at the stage where if everyone could just wash their hands. That was the stage we were at, was can't you just wash your hands? And the guys were all telling me that there was queues in the men's toilets. And I was like, weren't you washing your hands before? And they would just look at me. And it's like, okay, sure. So I discovered, at my last normal event that dudes just don't wash their hands, which is gross.
I love that you pointed out that the dudes were complaining that there was queues outside of the men's bathroom because
it's kind of ironic.
It's a novelty, isn't it?
It is. Who knew you had to queue? So it was, yes, queuing but I almost miss real life enough to miss that.
Well, I was just thinking that as well. I was just thinking, oh, you know what? Even the complaining about a queue for a bathroom seems so, I don't know, appealing now.
I'd love a queue at a train station toilet right about now.
I would love to meet a random woman in a bathroom and just become instant forgettable friends with her for 5 minutes.
Yeah, best friends.
Queuing.
And they would tell you how beautiful you are and you'll tell them they're a beautiful soul and you'll just have that moment and you'll never see them again. Yeah, and that hasn't happened for about a year.
And I would not be afraid that maybe being too close to them would contract me with a deadly virus. Yeah.
Yes.
Aww,
she says laughing. Well, this is a nice intro to a really dark horror comedy.
I know. So tell me, what did you think of the film when you first saw it at the festival? And has that opinion changed since you rewatched it almost a year after that?
Yeah, do you know, it really has. So the first time I watched it, I felt I had no idea what it was doing and where it was going to go and what its tone was. And I was really surprised. So I spent the whole time on the back foot, I think, going, what is this movie doing? Why am I laughing? Why am I afraid? Who is this person? So when I watched it last night for the podcast, I was like, I feel a lot better now. I feel a whole lot better. I feel like I can relax. I feel like, I mean, it's not a very relaxing film. There's some really interesting soundtrack bits, but I felt like I could kind of get into the groove of the tone, which I wasn't prepared for the first time. So actually, I enjoyed it. Not that I didn't enjoy it the first time, I did, but I enjoyed it more the second time because I knew what was coming and I knew the sense of humor that was there and what was, it was no longer a surprise. So I appreciated it a bit more.
So what did you make of the tone? Because it's very dark, but it's also very funny.
I've got this note in front of me that says,
"Oh, I love
this
your notes.
movie is like a weird nightmare," and I think that's what it is for me. It's the tone of nightmares. It's the tone where no one is doing what they should when they should, and no one is acting the right way. So, not to make any spoilers, but this is a podcast. This is a a movie about organ trafficking, and the whole thing is set off when an organ is not where it should be, and that is what nightmares are made of, Anna. Nightmares are when things aren't where they should be, like when you're packing for a flight and your suitcase is miraculously empty, or you have to make an emergency phone call, but of course your battery's empty. That is a nightmare. So this movie just descends further into like a random cheese dream, and I love it. And a really well written cheese dream. I want that script. The script is so sharp that it's really unpredictable and strange. So that tone, I think some people won't like that tone, and I can understand those people, but I'm not one of them.
Excellent. And I really sympathize with your way of approaching it as well, because it is a movie that kind of slaps you around the face several times within the first 30 minutes, and you don't really know what it is. And once you sort of settle into that nightmarish anxiety, and to me the film felt like both to me this movie read like what burnout feels like. Yes. You know, when you're going into the office, into a job that you're very good at, but you're kind of tired of. It's quite routine. You're kind of done, and you're tired, and you haven't slept, and you're just operating on coffee, and everyone is annoying you. Yes. Everyone is doing things wrong,
and you probably couldn't even identify specifically what they were doing wrong. They could just chew wrong, and you'd kick them out a window. Yeah, it's
just that kind of that constant sense of anger and annoyance. Yes. More than anger, it's annoyance. It's everybody's annoying our lead character. So let's talk about our lead character, Mandy, who's played here by a sort of independent horror icon, I would call her, Angela Bettis. What did you make of Mandy?
She's amazing. She's genuinely, her face is, I do not want to be here right now. And it's just variations on I do not want to be here right now. And it's an art. It's an actual art to have your face do those things, to give as little of a fuck as she gives. And I think that's another reason that it's a nightmare for me, because Mandy as a character is awful, right? She's terrible, really. She's not wholly terrible. She is, as you say, tired, and she has family ties, and she's doing her job. She really doesn't want to be there.
I don't think she's terrible. I think she's unlikable, but yes, go on.
But I think what I feel is that she doesn't, again, it's one of those nightmare things where I try desperately, even when I'm really pissed off with people, to be nice. And she doesn't have that. Yeah, she doesn't have any filter. So in that way, she's not filtering any of her true feelings. It doesn't make her a bad person, but she is, when she's being in that room with the woman who's clearly panicked about her mother being in the hospital bed, and she's just like, and you're going, just say something nice. And the closest she gets is, oh yeah, that's, I know that place that, you used to eat or whatever. And she kind of ushers her out. And at no point was there ever a nice interaction. At no point does she, is there anything considering closeness or friendliness. There is no friendliness there. So she's a marvel, a genuine marvel of and she's unpredictable too. I love that she's unpredictable. You have no idea what she's going to do in any given situation, whether it's in the early part of the movie or the later part of the movie. You're just like, I don't know what you're going to do next, and I'm going to keep watching, and I can't take my eyes off your face.
It's a weird combination that, and I think you're tapping into both of those extremes, is the fact that she's not terrible, but we're quite unused to seeing a lead character who is carrying from the very first shot of the movie the entire film on her shoulders.
Totally.
And it's an independent movie, you know, it's not a massive ensemble of actors. It's pretty much takes place in this hospital. So a lot of it is just on her, following her. And she doesn't really want to be there. And she's not a very likable person. She doesn't give a fuck about anyone or anything, really. And yet we can't stop watching. So it's that combination, I find, of a really sharply written character who does not really care whether you enjoy spending the next 90 minutes with them or not, but also anchored by Angela Bettis's performance, who is such a watchable actress that you can't take your eyes off of her, but you also don't want to watch her.
Do you remember she was really the same type of sort of disdainful character in Girl Interrupted? She played Janet. Do you remember?
Yes, I do remember her.
The girl with the eating disorder. Yeah. And she was like, I remember one particular scene where they were all walking through the snow and she was so light that she could walk on top of the snow and she was just smoking. Yes. And again, with that not giving a fuck attitude. And she just delivers this incredible character type it's not a trope. It's like the opposite of a trope. She's totally, you want to see more and you want to see what she's doing next, even though you're not welcome. You're really not welcome because there's a lot going on.
Yeah. And so without kind of going into the details just yet, what do you make of the way that she interacts with other people? I'm thinking especially of how she interacts with Regina, her cousin, supposed cousin.
Regina. Oh, Regina. I think there's a fascinating relationship there, because there is a relationship, but she doesn't want it. So it's almost as if it's pulling teeth, but there's clearly something that keeps her together because she keeps saying, I'm not your cousin. I'm not your cousin. I'm not your cousin. But it's like, you're still there. You're still there talking to her and you're actually working with her as much as you dislike it. You know, they've clearly done this before, this transfer of things. And I think there's, I like their relationship so much because Regina plays it so differently. So Regina's just, is it Chloe Farnworth? And she's just unbelievable as this over-the-top character who I think is kind of like a Harley Quinn-esque character, especially when there's this whole slow-mo let's eat Cheetos sequence, which is like budget Harley Quinn with cheese puffs and platforms and weird glittery socks. Like I'm so into her character as a complete joyous idiot. Like
she's like a joyous psychopathic idiot.
Yeah, she is. She really is. She's another one. You're just like, I've no idea what you're going to do. And I'm not going to the things that she does later on are genuinely shocking because you didn't, you knew that you couldn't predict what she was going to do, but you didn't think she was going to do those things. Meanwhile, you're just like, she's a happy sort of, just a bit silly, but no, actually when she's got something in her head, she's going to do it. So, I mean, those two they play off each other so well.
And what do you make of the setting? Because I think it's important to know that the entire thing, as I mentioned before, kind of takes place in this hospital on this night shift, and most of our characters are nurses or pretending to be, or patients. So there's this sort of wild small ensemble of hospital employees and random patients that come in and out. What did you make of the way that everyone played off of each other in this sort of workplace scenario?
I thought it was very TV. I thought it was lit very TV. Everything looked like a hospital drama. That's what I especially liked about it, because you could, when sometimes they were in the chapel, and obviously you knew that was part of the hospital and they were going in there to have chats or to pray, and the lighting was always the same, whether they were at the reception or whether they were praying with some stained glass behind to indicate it was the chapel. So I really liked it was almost like, I know a bottle episode is just one room, but it felt like that kind of bottle episode, like that kind of, you were in one place and one place only and you understand it. Like I don't think they even left that floor. I think they stayed on the floor and you didn't leave the hospital really. You saw the back alley. Actually, you did leave the hospital when you went to that other, when Regina went away to drop off the thing, but it still feels really small, and it feels really intimate, and it almost emphasizes the comedy nature of the drama in a lot of ways, because it's got that closeness, and because you are only being given a select amount of characters that become almost sort of comedy the further the movie rolls on.
If just listening to you talk about it in that way just makes me think of like an after-hour Scrubs.
Yes. Yes.
And before we start moving into the spoiler section, I think one of the most interesting things about this film is the way that it uses music. What did you make of the way that it creates its soundtrack, but also of the way that it uses music to create these sort of interludes?
Yes, you end up with these, and it's from the very beginning. The music really sets that tone, because it's completely over the top, and it mixes up vocals, and it reminded me almost like a comedic version of an A24 movie, because it's so obviously inverting that. Like when you were watching an A24 movie and you were being, this is the start of Hereditary, for instance, you are going to, the start of Midsummer even, you are getting these strings and they're being forced into your ears and you're going to be afraid. Meanwhile, this has a sort of comedic musical tone, but it's also slightly harassing. There's the vocals elements to it, where it sort of adds drama, and you're like, oh God, I'm stressed. I'm even more stressed than I was before, and I was already in a nightmare. But it still manages to balance it with comedy. So, and I also apologize to anyone listening that as I made that horrific noise into the microphone, but it's there's definitely I really appreciated the way it used music, because it used it almost as an additional character of, here's how you're meant to feel at this moment. You don't know how you're meant to feel, but it's going to be funny, because it's again talking about like a heightened reality. And I was on The Evolution of Horror talking about Teeth, which also has a very heightened reality that comedy horror has to fall into in order to make it palatable.
Absolutely.
So it really needs to live in that zone of absurdist and satire without losing any of its heart or connection.
Picking up on that, actually, because one of the things as well that really surprised me was I expected it to be a straight up horror film. I expected it to be gruesome and quite dark, and it is dark, but it is essentially a dark comedy horror.
Yeah,
we've spoken about the comedy, but how did you feel about the horrific elements of it? The
one moment where it properly did fall into horror was when it became a musical. In fact, the last thing we talked about was the last two ago. We were talking about the Mermaid
lore.
Musical.
Yeah,
that literally. When I was watching, so Anna and I are talking about a musical again. Okay, sure.
I sense a theme.
Yeah, there is a theme here, but. Hilariously, that's where the horror came in. That's where the spurty, gory, nasty, organ squishy horror came in. And then it didn't actually let up. There was a few bits a bit later on where things just got really... Are we in spoiler territory yet?
Not yet.
Okay, well, things get really nasty later on, and it's quite surprising, because I think when you set a horror movie in a hospital, and then if you make it about organs, suddenly every single character becomes a walking set of organs, right? So suddenly when you make the plot of your movie, let's get a kidney, suddenly everyone's just kidneys on legs, right? So you've basically it's true, right? You've turned the plot into a series of flesh wrapped kidneys, and who is going to get, who's going to fall, who's going to get their flesh punctured to get the kidneys, because everyone's just a walking kidney. So that entire premise immediately goes, oh, now we're in horror territory, and how they're going to deal with that is very interesting, because the minute you start going inside people to pull out organs, in any other film, you'd be sitting in Hostel, or you'd be sitting somewhere else. So I think that's what's really interesting about it, is hospitals are horror. Hospitals are very real horror. As we know right now, hospitals are horrific places where brave people do brave things. And when you pivot that and turn it into comedy. You do walk a very thin line, so you need to err into absurdism, and you need to know what your tone is, because otherwise you're just going to come off as tasteless and disgusting. You're just gonna. I say that as someone that made that kidney joke earlier, but it's because I live in that satire world when I'm talking about movies like this. So I think it's actually very sort of masterful tonal shifts to be able to err into horror without making everyone throw up.
I mean, there's not that much that we can discuss without going into spoiler territory, and I really want to discuss all the gory. I'm actually looking at the IMDb right now, and I almost expected all the character names just to be like kidney on legs 1, kidney on legs 2, kidney on legs 3. But before we move on into the details of 12-Hour Shift, would you recommend that horror fans seek this film out?
Yes, absolutely. Watch it, and come back and listen to our spoilers once you have.
Excellent. So on that note, let's move into the spoiler section of our discussion about 12-Hour Shift. Now that's it for our spoiler-free discussion of 12-Hour Shift. If you want to listen to the rest of the conversation that Louise and I had, do head over to our Patreon feed, and you can listen to the full spoilerific conversation about 12-Hour Shift. And in the meantime, we will be back this Friday with more vampire conversations. In the meantime, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. Please do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. They do help a lot with people discovering the podcast. If you want to find out more about what we do, we publish everything on thefinalghost.co.uk. We publish a weekly newsletter with horror treats, and we are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Final Ghost UK. You can also follow Louise on Twitter at Shiny Demon, and I am at Anime Demented. Thank you for listening, and we will be covering more new releases and horror stuff, both here and on our Patreon feed. So if you're able to, we do appreciate your support a lot, but these are weird times. And if you can't or you don't want to, that is absolutely fine. We're still going to be publishing free episodes every week and publishing spoiler-free discussions of new releases as well. As always, thank you for listening.